Induction is the next intervention. I want to start by saying induction is not for, your 2 days after your due date, or you feel like your baby's so big you want to get him out, or you're tired of being pregnant. Those are not reasons for induction. Several types of inductions are sweeping of the membranes, rupturing the membranes, which is also called an amniotomy, which is breaking the waters, when the doctor breaks the waters. Pitocin, and then there's natural forms of induction that I'll get to later in the video. Women are mostly induced 2 weeks after their estimated due date, which is just an estimate. It's only right 5% of the time. So you shouldn't go by the due date the doctors give you, like according to ultrasounds or measuring or any of that, because it's only right 5% of the time. So most likely it's going to go a little earlier or a little later, and you just have to deal with it. The baby will come out when the baby wants to come out. So forget about due dates. Call it a due month or a season, like, sometime this fall, we're expecting the baby. And that way you won't have relatives hounding you all the time like they did with me or my sister, who actually went I think it was around 43 weeks, but it could have been more. So just don't tell anybody your estimated due date. Just say, yeah, sometime this month or this season, whatever. Stuff like that. Many women are induced only to give birth to a premature baby. So there you go. The estimated due date wasn't even right, and their baby wasn't ready to come out anyway. It's premature. Induced labors can end up in C-sections because a baby that is not ready shows more distress on the fetal monitors. So here we go with the different types of induction. So I'll start with Pitocin. It is artificial oxytocin, which is the love hormone your body naturally makes. It is not the same thing. Doctors and all these weird medical websites, say it's the same thing. It's not the same thing. It's a drug. Pitocin makes contractions way more painful than your normal natural contractions would be. Anesthesia is given to reduce the pain, but it slows labor down, so then more Pitocin is given. Like if they give you an epidural, that'll slow your labor down because you can't really feel what you're doing, so then they'll up the Pitocin again.
In the hospital, you're not allowed to have very long labors. So if you're not dilating rapidly, which you're likely not to do if you get an epidural early in labor, you will be given Pitocin. They'll put the Pitocin in the IV. It will flow into your veins. Pitocin makes contractions longer and stronger and closer together. So then the pain of labor is much worse. So you go with that for a while because you have the epidural, but eventually the pain of the contractions is overwhelming the epidural. You need to up the epidural, and then labor slows down more because of that, so then you need more Pitocin. Now you're not feeling the pain of the extra Pitocin because you've got the epidural, but your baby is getting compressed blood and oxygen supply because Pitocin contractions last so long and are so strong, the blood and oxygen flow to the baby is compromised. So then the baby's likely to go into distress, and then you're sent off for an emergency cesarean from a baby in distress from contractions induced by the Pitocin, which was necessitated by the epidural.
Step by step, one intervention leads to a series of interventions. And the net result is the mother finally ends up with a cesarean, and everybody says, thank God we were able to do all those interventions to save your baby. The fact of the matter is, if they didn't start the cascade of interventions, none of that would have been necessary.
There is clearly an association with induction of labor and cesarean delivery.
People don't have the information. When you look at obstetrics in general, there's been a series of very intense interventions that physicians have been doing day in and day out to millions of women, and there's not a medically justified reason for doing
Babies
those things.
born after a drug-induced labor are 3 times more likely to have trouble breathing. Pitocin is not recommended for pregnant women and not approved by the FDA at all for elective induction. So that tells you something right there. So here's what the FDA says Pitocin causes. It causes bradycardia, which is a slow heartbeat for the baby, causes low Apgar scores at 5 minutes, causes premature ventricular contractions, which I looked this up, and it basically means that in the baby's heart, the 2 lower chambers of the heart have irregular heartbeats. It causes neonatal jaundice, permanent CNS or brain damage, neonatal retinal damage, fetal death, and neonatal seizures. So definitely going down that list, not something I would even want to consider. I wouldn't want to consider any of those causes happening to my baby for taking that drug. I would never do it. Another form of induction is sweeping of the membranes. It's usually the first method the doctors will offer. The doctor inserts a finger into the opening of the cervix and moves the finger around. They try to separate the membranes of the amniotic sac from the cervix. Some women find the procedure painful. Bleeding and cramping are common side effects. From sweeping of the membranes, you have an increased risk that bacteria will weaken membranes, leading to water breaking premature, and care provider might accidentally break the water when they're trying to sweep the membranes. There's also an increased risk of group B strep, which is a bacteria found in our gastrointestinal tract. So also all these risks are nothing I would ever want. I would never consider sweeping of the membranes. The next form of induction is amniotomy, or the artificial breaking of the waters. It's done with a crochet-like hook. Take a look at this. It's done to almost all women as an attempt to start labor. Also done so the doctor can apply an electrode to the baby's head when using a fetal monitor. If you saw my video about fetal monitors, that electrode can also leave a lesion on the baby's head, causing a scab, a lesion, stuff like that. The natural descent of the water bag during labor makes the cervix dilate, and it stretches the perineum at the same time. So if the waters are artificially ruptured, then you didn't get that perineum stretched. That can prolong labor and lead to an episiotomy, where they actually cut the perineum so the baby can come out. The amniotic fluid protects the baby's head, so if it's ruptured, it can cause problems for the baby during contractions, because during contractions, the baby's head, they say, receives most of the force of the contractions, so that's harder on the baby's head. Also, when you artificially break the waters, that can cause cord prolapse, and that's when the cord starts coming out before the baby's head actually comes out, and that can be a big problem. But the reason that breaking the water does it compared to when your water naturally breaks is because when the doctors artificially break the water, it just gushes, and that leads to the cord kind of coming out with it. But normally when your water breaks, it's more of like a trickle, or it's just not as much of a force of a gush as when the doctors break it. So that's also an amniotomy, something I would not ever consider having if I was in labor or trying to get induced. I would just let it go naturally. Here are some of the natural alternatives I've found. A study found that a breast pump, if used for 15 minutes, it can induce labor in 71% of women, which is most women. Another study found that nipple stimulation could induce labor in 45 minutes as compared with 90 minutes with Pitocin. Oxytocin is the hormone produced through nipple stimulation, and it stimulates uterine contractions. So you can look up online, and they'll have like hundreds of different forms of, they say, natural methods of induction. I mean, you'll see things on there that say eat spicy food, eat a bunch of pineapple, have sex, because whatever's in the semen can trigger you to go into labor, which is kind of weird because Pitocin, one of the ingredients in there, is like pig semen. So it's like kind of, well, it's not the pig semen, but they take hormones or prostaglandins or something like that out of it. So that's definitely not vegan and not anything I would want at all. So yeah, so just have sex with your partner, a lot of like lovey-dovey stuff, because whatever got the baby in there, that's what's going to get the baby out. A lot of people don't know that, because, you know, you go to a doctor's office and it's all like sterile and weird and a bunch of people looking at you, touching you, coming in and out. It's just not a good situation, not like a romantic scenario, as if, you know, as in the romantic scenario, sex that got you pregnant. You need to go back to that and not be in a well-lit room with a bunch of strangers and people you don't know or like. you know, having their way with you, doing whatever. Other forms of natural induction they'll say is like, you know, get out there and start walking more, you know, do more rigorous exercises, start walking up and down stairs. And a lot of these things I tried, but honestly, the thing that I feel got me naturally induced is the morning. If you saw my video where I talk about the outcome of my unassisted pregnancy, the morning before I gave birth at 8:15 is when she came out, and in the evening. That morning, I told my husband we need to go to the track and sprint, because I saw like a durian rider video like in the middle of the night that night, and he was talking about how sprinters have like the best bodies and like it's a good form of workout or whatever. So we went to the track and I sprinted like a half a mile, I think it was, I don't know if it was 2 different times or just 1 time, but I was like pregnant as hell and it felt awesome, and I wasn't like overexerting myself or anything like that. So that was, I feel like that was what it was, because then later, a few hours later, I kind of noticed like a mucus plug sort of thing coming out, and then if you see the video, I talk about everything that happened from there on about the labor and the birth. I feel like all the other little things didn't really help, because earlier I was trying to walk up and down stairs and doing the pineapple, stuff like that, and it never really worked. Hey, John. Another form that they say is a natural form of induction that I wouldn't recommend is castor oil. A lot of people are into it. If you look on YouTube, there's a bunch of dumb chicks trying to take castor oil to induce their labors. Like, no offense, I mean, I'm sure they're nice people, but it's really bad. It dehydrates you and causes diarrhea, and I don't think that's a good way to go into labor. You want to be hydrated, and it's just not a good idea. And then it flushes everything out. It's just not good. So don't do that, and look up more natural alternatives if you're into that. Otherwise, just be patient and wait. The baby will come. It's not like it's going to be in there for a year. You know, it'll come when it's ready to come. So thanks for watching this video on induction, and stay tuned for the next one.